Good morning everyone. We're very excited to have our two speakers here with us to share about their last 40 years in their careers and their lives, and of course their association with St Michael's is a part of that. We're celebrating Dr Macnabs' 40 years with St Michael's. This is the second in our series of seminars, and we're so pleased that you can be here to share Kenneth and Elizabeth's talks with us together. St Michael's is very proud of both Kenneth and Elizabeth. Kenneth Ralph was one of Dr Macnabs' first assistants here some years ago and was most innovative, supportive and caring in his presence, a very positive presence at St Michael's. He has then continued his association in various ways over the years and has been an author and a therapist, psychotherapist himself in his own practice and with other organisations too. He'll tell you more about that. I won't steal the thunder. Elizabeth Cho, of course, who'll be speaking second, is soon to be made a golden legend in the Australian Food and Wine Festival for her contribution as an educator and a advocate of Chinese cooking and culture in Australia. She's been an educator in cookery for 50 years, and had an amazing career, but she will speak to you about that. First of all, I would like to introduce, and I hope you'll make him very welcome. As I say, we're very proud of Mr. Kenneth Ralph.
Well, just to read what I got here, all right? One of the big things about my last 40 years has been its unpredictability. In fact, so many things have happened that it has almost been too difficult to keep up with them. So I think my story illustrates the sayings of the 5th century Greek philosopher Heraclitus: everything flows and nothing remains. Everything is flux. It's another F for you. Everything is flux. Nothing is stationary. And it is to Heraclitus that was attributed the phrase that you cannot step into the same river twice because you are not the same person and it is not the same river. So in my early 30s, more than 40 years ago, I was a practicing Presbyterian clergyman. I expected fully at that time to have a lifelong vocation as a minister of the church. I expected, as we did in those days, to serve half a dozen churches. I also hoped at that time that I would get married. I hoped that I would have children. I hoped that I would have a house paid off, and I'd hope to have some way to survive on a pension. But how could I have anticipated that I would then leave the land of my birth, the land of the long white cloud, the land whose team got beaten last night by the Australians, by the way? How could I have anticipated I would have crossed the Tasman and eventually become naturalised as an Australian? How could I have anticipated that on one Sunday night about 7:10 in the spotlight, I would look out as I did and surveyed the congregation and feel a jump in my heart as I saw a young woman there I'd never met before, and as I listened to the things in my head that said, I must have a chat to her later. How could I have foreseen that I would train as a psychotherapist, that I would publish articles in a book, that I would teach religion in a uniting church private school for a decade, that I would set up my own counselling practice? How could I have foreseen I would conduct anger management programs in Her Majesty's prisons, working with some of the state's most infamous criminals? Or that I would sit on hay bales on an Otway pig farm talking to chaps as they wondered how to make sense of the death of a self-inflicted death of one of their colleagues, or that I would teach counselling programs for team leaders in a glass-making factory. And one of the surprising phone call that came in my mid-60s from the head of a hospital clinic inviting me to join a team providing counselling services for the postnatal depressed dads and mums of Geelong. And how could I have foreseen that now at 75, I still get a buzz trying to work out of my head how to help them find their way through and out of this black forest of their melancholy. The exciting unpredictability of the future. The flux, as Heraclitus said, of course, affects everything. Way back then, and when I was Francis's assistant here, way back there, I think I could have stood up and said in good heart and faith the words of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. Now I stand up and sometimes I will say the words, mostly I don't, because there's only 4 of those things that I now believe in. 95% of the things I believed then, I no longer believe. And yet the strange unpredictability of it is that this de-Christianization, if that's what it is, has enriched and made more full rather than damaged my spirituality. And how could I have foreseen how, you will identify with this, how gobsmacked I would be by the arousal of a certain cluster of feelings that would flow through me with the birth of my first grandchild, Abby, and an arousal that would repeat itself with her 2 cousins, Elsie and James. An old man having such tender, never experienced before feelings for such a little person. What an amazing life experience. Abby, in fact, is now 5, but when she was 4, she became a sort of a religious advisor to me. And it was about the resurrection. It was Abby, by the way, who came back from Indonesia and had seen lots of Buddhas and went to lots of temples. And she and her sister and mother and father worshipped here one Christmas Day. They sat up top there, and the minister was doing what ministers do. She wasn't paying any attention, but she turned to her mum and dad, said, "Where's the Buddha?" Anyway, she said to me one day, "Granddad, when you were a little girl like Elsie was about 1.5 and Abby was 4, when you were a little girl like Elsie, you believed that Jesus came out of the cave." This was her reference to the tomb. But she said, "But when you're a big girl like me, you know that he only came out a little bit." How could I foresee way back then that son number 2, who could hardly write a decent English essay in that pivotal year 12, would one day finish up coming into your homes every day on radio and TV or the daily newspaper, writing his sport articles on Sheeds and Gaza and Mick, and that son number 2 would become fast approaching a world authority on malaria? And how could I foresee the pleasures that come when your offspring, these 2 boys, fall in love with a certain woman, and these women become your daughters-in-law, and hopefully, in my case certainly true, became a friend? So the surprises just kept coming and coming, a whole raft of them. And I'm now conditioned to them arriving. They seem to me to be the norm. I'm not hanging out for them. I'm not addicted to them. Their arrival does not discount anything that has happened in the past. Indeed, some of them grow out of the past and build on it, and they add colour and nuance and novelty and completeness to the painting that is my life. It surprises me that I seem to be hardwired to be open to the new thing, but I'm also aware that the duration of the future, I'm hardwired about that, is as unpredictable as anything else. My biological dad died at 34, my adoptive dad at 72, I do, perhaps foolishly, perhaps not, have a year in mind that I'd like to arrive at, 2020. I'll be 89 then. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to be around, as any of us would not want to be around if we were not living well, since living well is better than living long. And to live long but not live well is not to be recommended, which is why some of us reasonably gung-ho believers in rational suicide and in medically assisted suicide. I'm also realistic enough to know, of course, that there will be some nasty whacks yet to come. I could be dead of a fast-growing cancer by Melbourne Cup Day. Or what happened to my mum could happen to me. For several years, she just wandered around in the past. A 92-year-old woman, believing she was a 15-year-old cook on those sheep stations way back there in Tolaga Bay in New Zealand. But she was 75 years ago. But in her Alzheimer's land, no future for her, just living piteously trapped in the past, experiencing the past and re-experiencing it day after day after day after day, looking after those shearers and those fences. Of course, I have already experienced some of those nasty whacks along the way. The first one was being told by my dad at 16, by the dad I thought was my dad, that he was not my dad. That was a biggie. Disappointment in love, we all have them, was another biggie. The death of my foster brother at 21 and my sister at 39 were blows. And then a solid recent whack to my wife, the girl who sat up the back there 30-something years ago. I'm going to be in trouble here. 30, how many, Alison? 40 years ago. That was a whack to have her diagnosis of a triple negative cancer. I simply say these things to acknowledge that the unpredictables are not all exciting or welcome. And some of you may have been to Klimt's exhibition down at the National Gallery on St Kilda Road, and you may have taken time to go to see in that small room the Beethoven frieze, and you may have read the inscription on the wall, which helps you understand the symbolism of the frieze. It tells us that the imagery of the painting is about suffering, malevolence, murder, lust, sickness, death, and gluttony. Well, any of them can be sitting out there waiting for us to get to them, can't they? There's no reason why they shouldn't be. And we're not entitled to immunity from any of these items in the world, since the world can be a dangerous place. One question I have had to answer in my mind is, how do I explain this business of being, how I put it today, being hardwired to expect the unpredictable and to try and welcome it rather than resist it? Some would say genetic resilience, and that's probably true. Just about being lucky to have the right genes. Some would say first nest experiences, Kenneth, and that's possibly true in my case. But in my view, without discounting either of those two, life itself has played the big role in hardwiring me. It sort of made it impossible for me to believe in anything else other than the unpredictability, and to recognize that unpredictability is the trend of life. So it's because of that experience of life and life as the teacher that I love the famous quotation from Aeschylus's Agamemnon, a couple of thousand years, of course, ago. He leads us in the way of wisdom's everlasting law. The truth is only learned by suffering it. In sleep, the pain distills, bleeding on our memory, and makes us wise against our wills. And then there have been some key people, my mentors, who have taught me about unpredictability. There was Jesus of Nazareth, with his amazing images about the wind blowing where it wills, and a little mustard seed growing up and doing this and doing that, and his seminal ideas about the kingdom of God that he spoke about in the parables, about a deity being here and a deity there, and now and then and tomorrow and in this place and that place, but no one ever able to tie it down. So he continues to be a mentor with those sage words of his. Sigmund Freud, who we've already heard about this morning, here is an important mentor with his wonderful view that we're all caught up in the sway of this rambunctious unconscious, which, as Francis reminded us, is both benign as well as destructive, with both forces jostling always in us for supremacy. Alongside Freud, I would think a mentor to help me be conditioned and hardwired to believe in the unpredictability of the future is Charles Darwin, with his notion of the adaptability of the species. I find it a rich belief to impregnate my mind with. We are tough, durable critters who have it in us to adapt and survive and find our way. Then Charles Birch is there. For 20 years he was the professor of biology at Sydney University, and in that time he found a way to reconcile religion and science, which worked for him and for some of us too, with this notion of panentheism. Pantheism is that God is in everything. God is everything. Panentheism is that God is in everything. So a divinity within all nature, a ceaselessly creative, active life force. So he was a mentor. And then there's my wife, Alison. I was put down here 38 years, but she said 40. She lived out in front of me and beside me this notion of not standing still, but going after the next thing, and then going after the thing after that, and then while you're still immersed in that, plotting and working out what to do when that one is finished. And finally, there was a young clergyman psychologist with whom I did weekly psychoanalytic therapy for 2 years. And he, how could I have foreseen at the time, he became what I would say now was my emotional savior. At the time of meeting him, I had been, for 30 years or more, an anxious, tightly strapped, self-contained person. I was also in the throes of a low-grade depression that knocked me around for several months, and he knows my enduring debt to him. I think sometimes I wonder what happened to him. He was a rather self-effacing man who preferred to live in the shadows, but some of you may know him, sitting down here at the front. He rescued me from myself by helping me find courage simply to explore and come to terms with the self that had always been there, but that I was frightened of. His focus was on my selfhood, not my religion, although a secondary effect was a massive shift in the tectonic plates of that religion. His analytic work on me for 2 years meant, therefore, that I came to a completely different view of that wonderful saying of Jesus, which I had interpreted in one way then, but see differently now. Enter by the narrow gate, since the road that leads to destruction is wide and spacious, and many take it. But it is a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Comment of Jesus in Matthew 7. Well, one other biggie reminded me to keep on expecting the unexpected. When I was 60 and my mum was 80, she talked to me for the first time ever about my biological dad. Although she knew that I knew that the dad I grew up with was not my biological dad, she and I had never talked about that. It had been a sort of a secret, unspoken thing between her and me for those 60 years. It was all on a log that she spoke to me about it at Dalesford. And I think she came over from New Zealand, an 80-year-old woman, to complete this thing before she died in order to have this conversation. She gave me a name of this fellow who was my dad, and a mini story about him. So when she discovered she was pregnant to him, she was 19, she wrote to him, and he replied that he wanted to be a pilot, not a father. Thank you very much. So they never met again, and nor did he ever meet me. She said that she was later told that he was dead, but she never followed it up. It was, she said, a war death. But after that conversation, I did follow it up and set out on a journey to discover him. It took many months, but I found him, well, sort of found him. He had been blown up in his Halifax bomber on Trinity Sunday, 31st of May, 1942, in that famous or infamous raid, however you want to talk about it, when 1,000 English bombers, first of its kind, set sail across the ocean to bomb the gorgeous German city of Cologne. I eventually did meet his family, which of course now was my family. And there are scores of these new people in my new family. And I found out about him, of course, so I now have his war records and his school books and his aviation glasses and his diary and the letters he sent home from the war. And so I found myself not only to be a Ralph, my adoptive dad's name, and a Gibson, my mum's maiden name, but also a McLean, his name. And I'm not any one of them more than any of the other, but a blend of all of them, and quite happy to be a mix of them all. Fancy that. A man in his 60s setting out to find a father he never knew. The amazing unpredictability of the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kenneth, and Dr Macnab will thank you further at the end. First of all, I would like to introduce the beautiful Ms. Elizabeth Cho, a member of the St Michael's family for a long time and a well-known educator and Chinese cook. Please welcome Elizabeth Cho.
Well, hello everybody, and certainly it's rather a rare privilege for me to be standing here on this platform to celebrate 40 years of Dr Macnab's ministry. Dr Macnab, I'm also celebrating this year, but I'm celebrating 10 years better than you, 50 years of working in my industry. And I'm just wondering that after you've listened to the other speakers who have been chosen to give you a little talk on being a part of St Michael's here, that there won't be an awful lot of contemplation, I think, or anything profound for you to take away with you, because the title of my little talk to you today is simply this. It's how I live my life and why I'm not yet ready to hang up my wok. So... And if you might remember, I do remember very clearly Dr Macnab expressing his opinion or his reaction to so-called television chefs. So I'm feeling a little insecure and a little bit afraid this morning. But I promise you this will not be a masterclass, and I will not be sharing any recipes with you this morning, unless it's a kind of recipe that may be of a different sort. So I have been a part of the community of St Michael's here, I think since 1975. And I do remember coming into this church and being bowled over by its beauty. Anybody here remember the royal blue carpet with the gold fleur-de-lis design on this? Yeah, how many? Oh, good. Well, we share those memories, and it hurt me when those carpets came up. I thought, oh, it was almost royal. But anyway, St Michael's have been part of my life now, and I can actually go back further than that. I can go back to when I was a schoolgirl of 14, and I used to accompany my then music teacher, Dorothy Gledall, to services here. She used to do the flowers here, and the minister was Reverend Gordon Powell. And I remember even at 14 years of age, I was really impressed with this. It was called then the Collins Street Independent Church. And I could hardly have envisaged that don't do your arithmetic, 66 years later, I would be standing here in this capacity. So there you are, why I'm not yet ready to hang up my wok. So my life has always been divided into two parts, my Chinese part and my Australian part. And the story starts with my grandfather, who at the age of 17 years or so left southern China, a little village there, to come to Australia to earn enough money to send back to the village to help support the clan. And they called him Jimmy RQ, and he proved to be good material for the village because he worked hard, not in the goldfields, but in clearing the bush around the areas. I think most of you will know when I talk about Waganya, Corowa, Deniliquin, Beechworth, around that area in Rutherglen. So he was a pioneer of that time, and he used to have 500 men to work under him, clearing that bush, ring barking the trees and hand digging the roads. By the time he was 23, he was a businessman, and he owned Waganya's first general store, and he was supplying the needs of the rapidly growing population of the Chinese gold miners who had answered the call of the goldfields. And as well, I think this is most interesting, he managed the first Chinese workers on the All Saints vineyard. So next time you have a glass of All Saints, you think of my grandfather. And he has been recognised up that area by the family of All Saints and around about, because they created a bottle of port up there with his name on the label, calling him the founding father of the Chinese community of the time. So my father, with his three brothers and my aunt, they were born in that little town of Waganya, and that was making them all ABCs. Do you know what ABCs are? Australian-born Chinese. I met an American boy once who said he was an ABC. I said, no, you can't be. You're not Australian. He said, but I'm American. American-born Chinese. I said, oh, that's not as good, not as good. My mother was born in China, and she arrived in Australia as a young bride and settled in Rathdown Street, Carlton, where my eldest sister, and my brother were born there. And due to the White Australia policy, my mother was forced to leave Australia to go back to China when she was, I think, 8 months pregnant with her third child. And Irene was born more or less en route back to China in Hong Kong, and the family settled back in that little village. And 2 years later, I was born there. So I'm CBC, you see. I'm the only one in my family of 6 who is CBC. And finally, when I was 3 years old, I didn't return. I came to Australia with my mother and the rest of my siblings and my grandmother, and my father was able then to obtain another visa for us to come back to Australia. My mother tells me that when we docked off the ship in I think Port Melbourne, I don't remember that day, of course, I ran screaming to her because I said, I've seen a ghost. And it was just a beautiful lady of quite ample proportions with a big bosom and snow white hair, and to me that was a ghost. I had never seen a Western person before. And by that time, Dad and his brothers owned probably one of the largest wholesale fruit businesses in the Victoria market. And our family lived in Franklin Street, West Melbourne, opposite the market. And the vast area around the Victoria market was my playground as a child. And my sisters, my brother and myself, we attended the King Street State School in West Melbourne. They were happy days, very happy days, extended family and everybody very close together. But I do remember one embarrassing thing. My mother could not believe that cold bread, cold sandwiches could possibly sustain her children through the day at school. So she trotted off to the local milk bar, in West Melbourne. He was a Greek man, and she taught him how to cook some Chinese food so that we could go up there for lunch. Very embarrassing. So I think that might have been the first cooking class in Australia, actually, in Melbourne, with my mother teaching this Greek man how to cook Chinese for her kids. My father, he was an unusual man for his time, outward going, very modern in his thinking, and he instilled in all our 6 children a respect for our ancestry, but provided and encouraged us to be a part of the Australian way of life. He saw to it that we had best education that he could give. He encouraged us in whatever interests they were, whether they were tennis or swimming or basketball or music lessons. He encouraged friendships right around with Australian friends. I remember going home to visit my Australian friends at home. One of them is here now, Deirdre. I remember going back to her home and having stewed rabbit, and that was the very first Australian meal I ever had in my life, when Deirdre's mother cooked stewed rabbit, and I loved rabbit ever since. I remember picking it up and eating the rabbit along with jam and scones and cream, because that was on the table as well. And in the Chinese way, we eat a little bit of everything that's on the table, you see. And then there was our church. It was the Church of Christ Chinese Mission in Queensberry Street, Carlton. Oh, for many, many years I endured long, long sermons and long, long prayers, because everything was done in 2 languages. First in Chinese, that they seemed interminable. They were always given by uncles or dad or somebody. They were all lay preachers then. And then somebody would interpret it all in English. And I can remember playing noughts and crosses a lot in that church, in all the hymn books. The hymns were actually hilarious. They were really hilarious, because we kids, our generation, were all singing in English, and our parents' generation and grandparents' generation were all singing in Chinese. The notes, the words never matched up. And our organist, she had a ball. She used to hold those chords to meet everybody, and the music would go on forever. She loved it. And I have to admit, though, to missing those wonderful, rousing evangelical hymns that I grew up with. You know, anybody know Shall We Gather at the River? And Blessed Assurance, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus. With respect to the hymns this morning, I do miss those lovely rollicking hymns. So I grew up in 2 worlds, as I said, and 2 languages, 2 customs, 2 sets of manners. At that stage, not 2 kinds of cuisine, only Chinese. But with this dual identity, I moved quite easily, I think through my father's influence, into the 2 worlds quite happily. I had to be very Australian, which I naturally was at school. And then the minute I came home, the door was closed. I was a Chinese daughter. Perhaps there was always a little bit of a vague irritant that I was not the same as my friends. I always wanted blonde hair and blue eyes. It was a little troubling, I guess, from time to time, but perhaps that's the grain of sand that hopefully produces the pearl. So my career, it didn't start in the kitchen nor in the TV studio, but in a classroom as a primary school teacher. And I loved that. I loved that first year, training as a school teacher. But early marriage put a stop to that and ambition, but it did set the stage for what I was to become later on. Not a teacher of the 3 R's, but a teacher of cooking. And at that time, I was a young mother of 4 small children, 2 of them here with me today, no longer small. And in 1961, I decided to open a cooking school. I missed the interacting with people, I missed the teaching, and I found that I had some skill, I had a knowledge of something that other people did not have. And so in answer to, I suppose it was a little bit of demand there. I was already demonstrating for raising money for the school or the local kindergarten, and so it naturally moved on to become a cooking school. But I was a late bloomer, I guess. And I read somewhere that late bloomers tend to be experimental and their goals are imprecise, so their procedure is tentative and incremental. And the imprecision of their goals mean that they rarely feel that they have succeeded. It's almost as though they think their success or achievements are accidents or luck more than anything else, because I never had any long-term grand plans. Things just happened for me. And one thing does lead to another, and inevitably the students of various backgrounds attended my classes over the many years from 1961. And I think it was about 1980 that I was approached by one of the students who happened to be the head buyer of cookbooks at the Hill of Content in Collins Street Bookshop, and she persuaded me that I should write a book. I couldn't imagine what I could add to the already number of Chinese cookbooks in her store, but Macmillan's publishers offered me a contract, and suddenly I became an author. And that first book is called The First Happiness, a saying by Confucius that says that food is the first happiness. I better not elaborate on that one with Dr Macnabs here, I think. I don't know that it's the first happiness. There's another Chinese saying that happiness is merely a matter of digestion, but that's a little bit too simple again. And so I think 7 more books have followed that first book. And then about the same year, another student who was connected with Channel 10 said, Elizabeth, I'm going to make an appointment with you to meet the directors of Channel 10 because I think you would be okay on television. And before I knew what I was doing, I was on Good Morning Melbourne with Annette Allison and Roy Hampstead. I was very, very nervous, I remember. Nobody told me what to do. I just stumbled through it. But I was with Good Morning Melbourne for 5 years. And then I think it was the promotion of another book. It was The Heritage of Chinese Cooking, which was a French, it was written in French as well, and it won an international prize in France. And so I was on Good Morning Australia, and the second week after I was there, then I was signed up to be a regular with Good Morning Australia with Bert Newton, and that lasted for 14 years. And that probably was the big beginning of being a public person, because you are in everybody's lounge room and they get to know you as a person. And then food and travel are just natural companions. They're naturally linked, and they're 2 great loves of my life. And then I decided to create the Elizabeth Cho gastronomic tours into China and Vietnam, and I go every year now, and I lead small groups there, and they are wonderful. Everybody comes back really, really happy. And then the years rolled on, and over the years of teaching, I decided that I would really go on with this. So I sought a deeper respect for my own heritage, to the finer qualities attributed to that most basic of all human endeavours, and that's cooking and eating. And I found the love of poets, I found the voice of poets echoing in my spirit with words like, the appreciation of good food, like the appreciation of music, is an unmistakable sign of culture. And another one which I rather love, I would rather eat a meal without meat than live in a place with no bamboos. Without meat, one becomes thin. Without bamboos, one becomes vulgar. There is a cure for thinness, but none for vulgarity, so have bamboo and pork now and again. So I love that one. And I think back now, and if I have contributed to the lives of my students and those who have travelled with me, then they too have enriched my life. And one such case stays very strongly in my memory. He was an unlikely candidate for a cooking school. He was a big burly fellow with a somewhat rough speech, and he turned out that he was a truck driver, and he was doing long hauls in between states. And I thought, well, he wants to learn cooking. But he stayed with me for 18 months, repeating and doing different courses. And he told me that he lived alone in Melbourne, and he used to dread coming home in between the hauls. He hated coming home to his little flat and living by himself and eating alone. He became quite depressed, and he watched me on television. He thought he would like to learn to cook and get a little bit of variety into his meals other than a couple of chops or some takeaway. And to his great surprise, he discovered that he had this natural affinity for cooking, a great interest, and he discovered a new world. And he soon found that he was looking forward to going home and practicing these new skills, and of course enjoying great adventure and delights in shopping and preparing and cooking. It wasn't long before then he invited his sister over to share his meals. He'd been a loner up till then. Then later some of his mates, his trucking mates. And he soon found that he was so motivated that he was getting to be known in his circles as someone to cultivate. And I thought to myself, through the physical act of cooking, he discovered a new purpose, a newfound joy with a great sense of achievement. And so while he was nourishing and nurturing his body, his spirit was also being nourished and nurtured. And I think to myself, how rewarding is that to a teacher, a case like that is. I actually dedicated my second book to him. Well, yeah, and as I said, with this year I celebrate 50 years in Melbourne's food industry. And I'm still in business, doing the same thing as I did 50 years ago. Maybe it's a record, but I don't know. Melbourne Food and Wine Festival are honouring me with a very special event coming up September the 7th at the Sofitel Hotel. So you can ring the Sofitel for bookings. My cooking school is still going strong, and I've never advertised the school. It still keeps on going. My Melbourne Chinatown tours, of which St Michael's has had a part in that, are still going every month. And October the 8th, I'll be taking another group into Vietnam. I celebrated a very big birthday a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. And so I suppose this is the time for giving thanks also and looking back. So I thank my parents for the good start they gave me, for every opportunity that they could give me. They were migrant parents, and so they had to work especially hard. My mother didn't speak any English. My father spoke limited English. And they taught me good values. They taught me loyalty and love of family. And I thank that little mission church in Carlton that gave me strong foundations for today. I think back to perhaps Corinthians 13 when I think back to that little church. I thank my children and my grandchildren, my 5 grandchildren, my 4 children, my 5 grandchildren for the joy they have given me in being the good human beings that they are. I love them and I'm proud of them, and I know they love me. And I thank St Michael's, the people here, and Dr Macnabs' ministry. Maybe 2 or 3 Sundays back, we sang a hymn that resonated a little bit with me. For ancient myth and symbol too, for faith that's old and faith that's new, the gifts of old, the gifts that's new, to lift us all. And I love those words. Naturally, the words are Dr Macnabs. I'm grateful for my journey on this road that I've chosen. I think I've made a fair fist of my life. Here I have a spiritual journey, and it's important to me. To quote Dr Macnabs' big E's, I can't remember them all, but I am encouraged, enlightened, enhanced as the evolution of my human spirit goes on. But I'd like to say to you all and to Dr Macnab, I have L's. Learner plates. L for learn, L for listen, L for letting go, L for laugh, L for live, and L for love. And that is why I'm not yet ready to hang up my wok, because my learner plates are still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your vitality and your words of inspiration, and to thank you further, and you too, Kenneth, Dr. Francis Macnab.
My church council said to me several times last year, what are you going to do for the 40th anniversary? And they wanted to do this and they wanted to do that. And I said, but I get up there, way up, how many feet or meters above everybody else every Sunday. I don't need these other things that you would like to provide me with. We'll do it differently. So I suggested I'd have several people give an address to you. And I chose the people very carefully. You saw one a couple of weeks ago with the oncologist speaking, and the 2 today, and there'll be one again in a few weeks' time. All very special people for me. But today, I want to talk about Kenneth and Elizabeth especially. I have great admiration for both of them. Both so different in who they are and where they've come from and the contributions that they've made and what they've been for me. But through it all, I find myself admiring what they've done and who they are enormously. And I want to thank them for being here today to make this presentation to you and to me, of course, for, in a sense, a 40th way of recognising St. Michael's Church and what I've been for it and you've been for me. But let me just talk a little bit about Elizabeth. I was astonished to find that she had an association with All Saints Vineyards up in Waganya, or her father did, because when I was a kid at university, first year at university, one of quite a close colleague of mine was the son of the owner of the Waganya All Saints Winefields. In fact, we used to make a great deal of fun of him, of being the son of a wine grower. And here I hear that your father was very much involved in the All Saints winery. What do you call it? Vineyards, I suppose, do you? Yes. And then another interesting thing was that my grandson, just going to secondary school this year, of course, had to pick his subjects. So he said he was going to do physics and maths and all that, and he's going to do German. And he saw that I raised my eyebrows with a great deal of affirmation that German was the proper language to be studying. But just recently he's told me, I'm giving up German. I'm going to study Chinese. And now he's going to Chinese school. And I said, but why are you doing that? He said, because China is the country of the future. How about that? At 12 years or 13 years of age. And now he's walking around speaking with great enthusiasm a little bit of Chinese that he has collected. So there's another link. And I thought there was something else which was quite important to you. Oh, yes. That when you said you like singing those ridiculous hymns. As you know, I look after another institution where religion is rarely mentioned, funnily enough, and certainly not mentioned unless I mention it. And so one day as I'm walking along the corridor to go to an executive meeting of my staff, we're gathering at that time, and so I just happened to start a little bit of a ditty. I said, shall we gather at the river? And two other members of my staff joined in and said, the beautiful, the beautiful. I said, where'd you learn that? I said, oh, where did you learn it again? Chinese church up in... Yes, they were, but they didn't do that. But so it's a peculiar mythology of what flows through many organisations and many generations. There it was. But Elizabeth, I want to thank you for your excellent presentation. Altogether, as I said, an inspiration that you are for many, many people, and someone that we can all admire for what you've done and who you are. So would you thank her particularly? Kenneth Ralph, well, he didn't tell you the whole story, actually, so a few things need to be said. I met him first. I was invited to New Zealand to conduct or to speak at a conference of clergy. Not awfully good at that, but that was the job I was to do there. And there was a very large group gathered, in fact, and there was this fellow with a great chunk of plaster on his leg. Remember? Yeah, you do remember. Great. And he sat there with the leg stretched out in front, and every now and again he would interrupt me. You see, and I said to the chair, or the host of the event afterwards, who is this fellow that keeps interrupting? I didn't keep interrupting, but interrupted me from time to time. He said, "Oh, he's a bright spark straight out of Princeton University." And there he is, Kenneth Ralph. So I thought, well, that's that, is it? Well, then a few months later, I don't quite know how long, I receive a letter from none other than the fellow who kept interrupting me, asking if he could come and join me here. And he described our beginning relationship over 2 years as I sorted him out, somewhat. Or he sorted himself out, really, as a good analyst would do. And we have retained a very significant relationship ever since. He's one of the few members of my former staff who will have lunch with me. And we've done so together over all those years. But a couple of stories I need to tell, because not only did he come to join me at Cairnmiller, which at that time was just up the street at 100 Collins Street. We had 2 floors up there at 100 Collins Street. But he also came, I offered him a post here within St Michael's, although it wasn't called St Michael's at that time. So he joined me here. Would you believe we had morning and evening services at that stage? So it was very early days, because it was my pledge when I first came here that one thing I'd get rid of very quickly was the evening service, and that happened. But one evening when we went back to the vestry, which at that stage was way up here behind, we had an interesting conversation, because in the congregation that night was a young woman about whom he has spoken, and she was known to me because years before, when I was a student, I was sent to Tasmania for summer vacation to a place called Stanley, and I put in my summer vacation as the resident minister of people of the Nut. We were all nuts, I think, but the Nut is on Stanley, right up the northwest corner of the island. And at one stage I was visited by the minister of the main church in Launceston, and his name was the Reverend Cliff Aldist. And he had a huge family, and he came up in his car with all these kids in the back of the car to see me, this student from over the water. And at one stage, he said, come on, we'll go for a drive. We didn't have seat belts in those days. And he said, you'll have to nurse one of them. So I nursed one of them, right? As we went for this drive. Will I complete the story? Well, the story is completed. When I got to the vestry that evening, I said to Kenneth, there's a young woman in the congregation, and her name is Alison Aldist, Cliff Aldist's daughter. I said, would you believe it? When they were in Tasmania, I actually went for a drive with them, and I nursed that girl on my knee. And he was getting more and more, doing his typical sort of gestures. And I said, what's the matter with you? He said, I'm dating her. And she's been around ever since. I haven't nursed her in all those years, by the way. So I want to particularly also thank you, where are you, Kenneth, for your presentation. As you know, I have a great regard for you, and what is more, that's been sustained over all those 40-odd years, 40 more years, and I thank you for what you've done today, and I'd like you to thank him also.
Thank you all. Thank you for attending today, and I'm sure you've enjoyed these wonderful speakers as much as we have. Thank you, and we shall see you for the next one of these seminars. Will be coming up in October with Dr. Leslie Canold speaking about her book, The Book of Rachel. That'll be the next one of these, but we shall see you next week, of course. Thank you. Thank you again to our speakers.